Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to, cut through the noise and get straight to the core insights from some really fascinating sources. And today we are definitely diving deep into something that affects, well, pretty much all of us in our digital lives, this whole ongoing debate around social media regulation. Our source material for this one is a really a thought-provoking episode of the Interjaysoins podcast. It featured Lena Sakai, who's the editor of Green Business Post, and Wagner Marcelo, the founder of Entrepreneur Culture. And Wagner has this interesting connection. He's close to Demi Getchko, who many call the father of the internet in Brazil. So there's some serious expertise there. Our mission today, it's really to unpack the implications technologically, socially, democratically of these regulations. And this isn't just, abstract stuff. It connects directly to bigger goals like peace, justice, strong institutions, which actually is part of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 16 for those tracking. It's fundamentally about keeping democracy safe and sound as a foundation for businesses and organizations to thrive. Okay.
If this is the kind of content you're looking for, subscribe now to receive more content of our channel.
So to kick us off, let's start with a pretty provocative example they used in the source material. Imagine this. A comedian gets like 8 years in prison for telling a joke, or maybe just having their entire social media presence wiped out because of something they posted. This is the actual scenario that framed the Interjaysoins discussion, specifically looking at the condemnation of comedian Leo Lins in Brazil. It makes it clear this isn't just some dry legal issue. It's about our fundamental everyday freedoms.
And what's really striking is just how much the conversation around this has changed and how fast. It used to be, a pretty niche thing, mostly legal experts, digital law groups talking about it.
Right, kind of academic.
Exactly. But the Leo Lins case, because it was so public, it just catapulted the whole issue into the mainstream. Suddenly it's a trending topic. Everyone's talking about it.
So it's moved way beyond just tackling fake news then. Is that the idea?
Oh, definitely. The scope is much wider now. We're hearing talk about regulating hate speech and even things perceived as attacks on democracy.
Okay, but that raises a huge question, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Who gets to decide what actually is hate speech or what counts as an attack on democracy? I mean, interpreting laws is always subjective to some extent.
Sure.
And it really depends heavily on who holds power at any particular time. That subjectivity, well, it potentially opens up a whole Pandora's box of problems for democracy down the line. It makes things very uncertain.
And here's where it gets really interesting, maybe especially for listeners running businesses or working in tech. The source pointed out a major concern. This regulation isn't just targeting, say, Facebook or Twitter. It expands to all digital platforms.
Yes, exactly. We're talking internal company intranets, link generators, even the companies that just host websites.
Wow.
If a user on any of those platforms posts something deemed illegal, the platform itself could be held responsible, legally liable.
So what does that mean in practice for those companies?
Well, connect the dots. It means businesses offering pretty much any digital service could face really severe penalties. Fines, shutdowns, who knows? And this leads directly, almost inevitably, to a really dangerous trend. Pre-censorship.
Pre-censorship meaning?
Meaning companies will feel forced to censor content before it even becomes a legal issue, just to be safe. They'll start removing anything they think might be divergent from whatever the current government line happens to be. Any government's line, really.
And you're saying this isn't just theory?
No. The source says it's already happening. Think about news sites turning off their comment sections.
Yeah, you see that a lot now.
Right. Often, that's precisely to avoid being held responsible for what commenters might say. It's a chilling effect in real time.
Okay, so that connects to a pretty bold prediction made in the source, that the internet as we know it is, quote, doomed to end. Why such a dramatic statement?
Well, think about the original internet. Its design philosophy was all about freedom, interoperability. It was built technically to resist censorship, open communication.
Decentralized, in theory.
Exactly. But this current global push for more control, for regulation, it could lead to fragmentation. We could see the global internet break down into, effectively, a series of national or regional intranets.
Like walled gardens?
Sort of, yeah. A bit like the situation in China, where powerful firewalls strictly control what content people can access. Now, the source does mention that this kind of pressure might force new decentralized technologies to pop up in response.
Sure, innovation happens.
But it also really highlights a core problem. Technology sprints ahead while laws and regulations just lag years behind. They're always playing catch up, and often in ways that end up stifling the very freedom and innovation they claim to manage.
Let's try and make this more concrete. The Interjaysoins podcast used a really powerful analogy from Demi Getchko. He said, Imagine if the companies managing our highways, the road concessionaires,
Oh.
imagine if they were held legally responsible for, say, drug trafficking that happened on their roads.
It sounds absurd when you put it like that, doesn't it?
The-
Because it is. It's essentially outsourcing a core function of the state law enforcement onto private companies. Instead of the police investigating the actual criminals, the drug traffickers in this analogy, they'd pressure the road companies to set up their own sort of police power, random stop searches, probably excessive and arbitrary for everyone just trying to drive.
I see the parallel.
And the source argues the exact same faulty logic is being applied to social media. It should be the job of police and the courts to investigate and prosecute individuals who commit crimes online.
Not the platform's job to preemptively censor everyone.
Precisely. Just taking down the content doesn't actually solve the crime itself. The person who committed it is still out there, and often that illegal activity just moves somewhere else, maybe to darker corners of the web, less visible channels.
So it doesn't fix the problem, it just hides it.
It can actually make it harder to track and address effectively. You end up stifling legitimate speech while the actual bad actors just get better at hiding.
So it really does feel like the state, or certain governments, are trying to pass the buck, shirk their responsibility, and push it on to private companies.
That's a good way to put it. And there was another analogy in the source that really drives this home. Think about a bar owner. Imagine a customer in the bar starts loudly voicing some really controversial opinions about the government, maybe even offensive stuff. Under the kind of regulatory logic being discussed, would that bar owner suddenly feel like they have to call the police on their own customer just to avoid being held liable themselves for what the customer said?
Wow, yeah. That seems like a crazy overreach.
It highlights how easily these digital regulations could bleed over into our physical lives. It blurs the lines completely between online and offline worlds, chipping away at freedoms we take for granted in, physical spaces.
That blurring of lines, that brings up another point this source addressed directly. This whole idea that there's a real world somehow separate from the virtual world.
Yes, the source was very clear,
Yeah.
the distinction. It's basically an illusion. It doesn't hold up.
How so?
Well, think about it. Online actions have very real consequences. A comedian posts a video on YouTube that can directly impact their income, their reputation, their personal safety, real-world stuff. And if someone commits an actual crime online, like libel, defamation, threats, we already have laws. Existing laws allow for legal action against the individual who posted the harmful content.
So the mechanism for accountability is already there.
It is. The dangerous shift, the source argues, is this move towards preemptive censorship by the platforms themselves. Not just accountability after a crime, but trying to stop things before they're even said. And we're not just talking one layer, we could see multiple layers. The platform censoring itself, the government directly demanding takedowns, maybe even higher courts weighing in with their own censorship orders.
Okay, this isn't just hypothetical anymore, is it? The source mentions specific examples, like governments looking to other countries for models.
Right. And this is where it gets particularly concerning. The source pointed to governments, including Brazil's apparently, seeking advice on internet regulation from places like China.
From China, not exactly known for its open internet.
Precisely. When a government starts looking towards, frankly, an authoritarian state for how to control the internet, rather than, say, other democratic nations, well, it sends a pretty clear signal. It suggests a potential move towards more authoritarian control domestically.
And what are the specific practices they might import?
The source paints a grim picture of the model in China. Police having the right to just demand your phone, check your content. If they find something bad, you could end up in so-called re-education camps or, just disappear.
That's terrifying.
Now, let's be clear. The source wasn't saying that is happening here right now, but the warning was stark. When you import a regulatory model, you often end up importing its full logic and potentially its worst consequences.
And what about things like shadow banning? They used to sound like a conspiracy theory.
It did, but the source notes it was basically proven to be real after Elon Musk took over X, formerly Twitter, and released internal files.
Yeah, the Twitter files.
Exactly. This sort of judicial or platform level suppression of information, making things less visible without telling the user. That approach, the source suggests, has been effectively exported and adopted in other places, including Brazil. It just shows how easily these control mechanisms can spread and become normalized almost under the radar.
So for people thinking, okay, maybe technology is the answer, distributed networks, crypto, like Bitcoin, things that are supposed to be censorship resistant,
Yeah.
what did the source say about that hope?
It offered a pretty sobering take, actually. It acknowledged that, yes, these technologies, decentralized networks, cryptocurrencies, they do make it harder for a central authority to just delete content or seize funds directly.
Okay, so there's some resistance there.
Some, yes, but it's not absolute salvation. Governments can still find ways. They can criminalize the use of these technologies.
Right, make it illegal to even use Bitcoin or a certain network.
Or they could create incentives, rewards, for people to basically snitch on others using them. And fundamentally, you still exist in the physical world. You can be arrested. Your assets can be seized offline. You face real-world consequences, regardless of the tech you use.
So technology alone isn't a magic bullet.
Not according to this source. They specifically mentioned Bitcoin, pointing out it's actually quite traceable, unlike, say, physical cash often used in corruption. The core battle isn't just about having better tech, it's about defending those fundamental freedoms in the first place.
That leads to a really interesting psychological question, I think. Why do people sometimes seem willing to trade freedom for what looks like security? Why fall for that illusion of safety offered by more control?
That's a deep question. I think the source suggests it taps into a very natural human desire for protection. People want to be safe from things like hate speech or fake news. It feels threatening.
Understandable.
Absolutely. And governments, potentially, can exploit that genuine fear. They come in promising security, promising order, but the price is often more authority, more power for the state. The source used another great analogy here. It's like trying to regulate all knives just because one knife was used to commit a crime.
Yeah, that punishes everyone for the actions of one person.
Exactly. It leads to broad overregulation that ends up harming the vast majority of perfectly law-abiding citizens. It creates a climate of fear and suspicion, especially in online spaces.
Okay, so wrapping this all together.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway for us, for the listeners, trying to navigate this digital world?
I think the main point is to be critical of the narrative that state control automatically equals protection. The source argues that this narrative often masks a deeper desire for, well, control, information control. Think about history. Traditional media, newspapers, TV could often be influenced, pressured by governments or powerful interests. They acted as gatekeepers. Social media, for all its flaws, disrupted that. It allowed anyone, anywhere, to share information in real time, unfiltered. Local news, eyewitness accounts, bypassing the curated narratives.
It democratized information flow, in a way.
Precisely. And that information flow, that loss of centralized control, is what many governments seem eager to regain now through these regulations.
So the fight for independent voices, diverse sources of information, it's maybe more important than ever.
Absolutely critical. The source was quite pointed, critiquing what it termed useful idiots, even some legal professionals who push for broad social media regulation without maybe fully seeing the potential downstream consequences. The argument isn't that harmful speech doesn't exist online or that people shouldn't be held accountable. It's that we should enforce the laws we already have against actual harm, defamation, incitement, threats, rather than punishing people for just being, idiotic online sometimes.
Right. Don't criminalize foolishness, criminalize crime.
Exactly. This push for pre-censorship, framed as fighting hate speech or fake news, is seen by the source as a really significant, dangerous step towards thought control and information suppression.
It sounds like a very strong call not to self-censor out of fear.
It really is. The source argues passionately against chilling your own speech just because you're afraid of losing monetization or getting flagged or facing some other platform penalty. It's a call to put freedom first, but also to understand that freedom isn't free. It comes with individual responsibility. If you cross the line, if you post something actually illegal or libelous, well, the existing legal system is there to deal with it. The core problem identified isn't a lack of laws, it's this growing desire to preemptively control expression itself. That's the fundamental threat to liberty they see.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive really hammered home how connected our digital existence is to these huge principles: democracy, justice, strong institution, that whole SDG 16 framework. This push for social media regulation, it's clearly not just a tech issue or a legal squabble. It's hitting at the core of free expression, the open internet ideal. And that discussion from Interjeisois with Lena Sakai and Wagner Marcello really paints a picture, maybe a worrying one, of the internet potentially morphing into these controlled internets. A definite reminder to stay vigilant.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. We live in a time where the idea of freedom sometimes feels conditional, where fear is often used as a tool to justify more control. So the question for you, for everyone listening, is how do you personally contribute to preserving real, genuine liberty not compromise liberty in both your digital life and your physical interactions. Something to mull over as you continue your own deep dives.
Thank you for joining us on this, I think, really essential deep dive. We hope it gave you some surprising insights, maybe some new facts to help you stay well-informed in this complex landscape.